The room smelled like leather and old paper when I watched my husband sign away my entire inheritance to his mother. That cold November morning in a Chicago notary office, I sat frozen in my chair while my lawyer's hand gripped my wrist under the table, stopping me from screaming. 3 months earlier, I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. I was wrong. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter much now, but the story does. I'm 62 years old, and for the last 37 years, I've been married to a man I thought I knew. We lived in a beautiful Victorian home in Oak Park, just outside the city. The kind of house with a wraparound porch where you imagine growing old, watching seasons change through those big bay windows. I thought I'd die in that house. I almost did, just not the way I expected. We bought that house together back in 1989, when the neighborhood was still affordable, and we were young enough to believe in forever. I remember the day we got the keys. My husband lifted me over the threshold, and we laughed because we weren't even newlyweds anymore. We'd been married 3 years by then. But it felt like a new beginning. We spent that whole first weekend painting the living room, a soft cream color I'd picked out from dozens of samples. He pretended to complain about my indecisiveness, but he was smiling the whole time. The house had good bones, everyone said so. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, a fireplace in the master bedroom. We raised our 2 children there. I can still see them racing down those stairs on Christmas morning, still hear their laughter echoing through the hallways during summer hide-and-seek games. My daughter took her prom photos on that wraparound porch. My son proposed to his wife in our backyard under the old oak tree. That house held everything I thought marriage and family were supposed to be. It started so small I barely noticed. Little exclusions, tiny decisions made without me. When did it begin? Maybe when his mother moved into the guest house 5 years ago. Or maybe it was always there, and I was too busy being the good wife to see it. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking? That became my daily life. Family dinners where conversations would halt mid-sentence when I entered. Hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when I came downstairs. I told myself I was being paranoid. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, was a presence. That's the kindest word I can use. 78 years old, with the energy of someone half her age and the manipulation skills of a chess grandmaster. She'd smile at me over Sunday pot roast while discussing financial matters with my husband like I wasn't even there. When I'd try to contribute, she'd pat my hand and say, "Let the men handle the money, dear." Except my husband wasn't handling anything. She was. Eleanor had been widowed for 15 years when she moved in with us. Her husband, my father-in-law, had been a successful banker who left her comfortable but not wealthy. She'd lived alone in a condo downtown until she fell and broke her hip. That's when my husband insisted she come stay with us. "Just until she recovers," he said. The guest house was supposed to be temporary. 5 years later, she'd transformed it into her personal command center, complete with a dedicated phone line and a file cabinet I was never allowed to look in. I remember one particular Thursday afternoon. The autumn light was streaming through the kitchen windows, making everything look warm and safe. I was making Eleanor's favorite lemon bars because I still believed kindness would somehow bridge whatever gap was growing between us. My husband came home early, and I heard him and his mother talking in the study. Their voices were low, urgent. I stood at the bottom of the stairs with flour on my hands, debating whether to interrupt. I didn't. That decision haunts me. I stayed in the kitchen, methodically measuring butter and sugar, trying not to hear the words that occasionally drifted out. "She doesn't need to know yet," Eleanor's voice, sharp and certain. My husband's response was too quiet to make out. I kept beating the egg mixture, kept focusing on the recipe card my own mother had written in her flowing cursive. She'd been gone 3 months by then, and making her recipes was how I kept her close. If only she could have warned me what was coming. The first real crack appeared during a family barbecue in July. Our son was visiting from Seattle with his family. Normal afternoon, burgers on the grill, grandchildren running through the sprinkler. Eleanor held court at the patio table, surrounded by relatives who hung on her every word. I brought out the potato salad I'd spent hours perfecting, and she glanced at it with this look, not disgust exactly, dismissal. "Oh," she said, "I wish someone had told me you were making that. I already ordered catering." Nobody had mentioned catering. The food arrived 20 minutes later, enough for an army. My potato salad sat untouched while everyone praised Eleanor's foresight. My husband kissed his mother's cheek and thanked her for saving the day. I stood there holding my serving spoon, invisible. Our daughter-in-law caught my eye across the patio and quickly looked away. That hurt worse than Eleanor's performance. What made it worse was that I'd gotten up at 6 that morning to make that potato salad. I'd driven to 3 different stores to find the specific ingredients, the red potatoes my mother always used, the fresh dill that made all the difference. I'd chopped and mixed and tasted and adjusted until it was perfect. It wasn't just food. It was an offering, a bridge, a desperate attempt to be valued. And Eleanor had demolished it with a single sentence and a phone call to a catering company. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I say something? Why didn't I stand up for myself right then? Here's the thing about manipulation at this level. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. No single incident is dramatic enough to justify making a scene. You question yourself constantly. Am I overreacting? Am I being too sensitive? Maybe I really am terrible at planning events. Maybe I should be grateful she's so involved. That night, lying in bed next to my husband, I tried to talk about it. "Did you notice how your mother handled today?" I asked carefully. He was scrolling through his phone, barely listening. "She was just being helpful," he mumbled. "You know how she gets excited about family gatherings." I wanted to scream that it wasn't excitement. It was erasure. Instead, I rolled over and stared at the wall until sunrise. The exclusion intensified after that. Family meetings I didn't know about until they were over. Financial discussions that happened in rooms I apparently wasn't welcome in. I'd find documents on my husband's desk, estate planning papers with Eleanor's handwriting in the margins. When I asked about them, he'd tell me not to worry, that everything was being handled. "Handled by who?" I'd ask. "By us," he'd say, and the U.S. never included me. Our daughter called one evening in late August. She lived in Denver with her husband and 2 kids, and we usually talked every week, but this call felt different. "Mom," she said carefully, "Grandma Eleanor told me you've been having memory problems. She said you're forgetting things, getting confused about money. Is everything okay?" I felt my stomach drop. "I'm not having memory problems," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who told you that?" But I already knew. Eleanor was building a narrative, planting seeds of doubt in my own children's minds. My daughter sounded relieved but uncertain. "Okay, good. I wanted to check. Dad seemed really worried when I talked to him last week." They were coordinating, talking about me, constructing a story where I was the problem that needed to be managed. I started doubting everything. Was I losing my mind? Had I always been this paranoid? I'd catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. When did I become so small? I was raised in a big Italian family in the Bronx, where everyone's opinion mattered, where Sunday dinners were loud debates and laughter. Somewhere between New York and Chicago, between being a daughter and being a wife, I'd learned to make myself quiet, to take up less space, to believe that good wives didn't cause trouble. My mother used to tell me I had fire in me. "You're a fighter," she'd say, usually after I'd argued with my father about something or stood up to my older brothers. That fire had burned bright through my 20s, had fueled my real estate career, had made me someone people listened to. Where had it gone? When did I learn to extinguish myself? You know that saying about boiling a frog slowly? That was me. The water got hotter so gradually I didn't realize I was cooking until I was almost done. I gave up my autonomy piece by piece. I stopped checking our bank statements because my husband said I was being controlling. I stopped calling my old friends because Eleanor said they were a bad influence. I stopped having opinions about our own home because somehow, without me noticing, it had become Eleanor's domain. The irony is cruel. I spent my 20s and 30s building a career in commercial real estate. I was good at it too. I could read a market, spot a bad deal from across the room, negotiate terms that made grown men nervous. But then my husband's business started struggling, and I made a choice. I stepped back from my career to support him. It was supposed to be temporary. Temporary became permanent, became forgotten. By the time Eleanor moved in, I'd been out of the workforce so long I couldn't remember what it felt like to be professionally competent. I convinced myself that sacrifice was love, that being selfless meant erasing myself. Studies show that 60 to 80% of domestic abuse cases involve coercive control, this insidious process where one person gradually strips away another's autonomy. I learned that statistic later, after everything fell apart. When I read it, I finally had words for what had been happening to me. I wasn't in a prison with bars. I was in a prison made of expectations and guilt, and my own desperate need to be good enough. The breaking point came on a random Tuesday in October. My husband left his phone charging in the kitchen while he went to pick up his mother's prescription. I wasn't snooping. I swear I wasn't. The screen lit up with a text message, and I glanced at it without thinking. It was from Eleanor. "Did you file the paperwork we discussed? Make sure it's done before she notices." Before she notices. She, me. I was she now, not even worthy of a name. My hands started shaking as I picked up the phone. I knew his passcode because we'd never had secrets. Or so I thought. The message thread went back months. Legal documents, financial transfers, discussions about my mother's inheritance that she'd left to me before she died last year. Money that was supposed to be mine. Money that was apparently being redistributed without my knowledge. There were dozens of messages. Plans laid out in casual conversation like they were discussing grocery lists. My husband typing about how difficult I'd been lately, how emotional, how unreasonable. Eleanor responding with advice on managing me. Managing, like I was a problem to be solved instead of a partner to be consulted. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the counter. I barely heard it over the roaring in my ears. One message in particular made my blood run cold. My husband had written, "She's been asking questions about the investment accounts. Should I show her the fake statements we prepared?" Eleanor's response, "Yes, but make sure she doesn't have time to look closely. Keep her distracted." Fake statements. They'd been showing me fabricated financial documents. For how long? What else had they lied about? I sat down at the kitchen table because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. All those late-night conversations I'd overheard. All those documents I wasn't supposed to see. They'd been planning this for months, maybe years, moving assets, changing beneficiaries, slowly erasing me from my own life. And I'd let them. I'd made it easy by being so determined to be the good daughter-in-law, the supportive wife, the woman who never caused problems. Did you know there's research on women who've been murdered by partners? 25 cases analyzed, and every single one involved coercive control before the fatal violence. Every single one. I'm not saying my husband would have killed me, but I'm saying the control was that complete. The isolation was that thorough. And if I hadn't found those messages, how much further would it have gone? That night, I couldn't eat. I pushed food around my plate during dinner, while Eleanor praised my husband's business acumen, and he preened under her attention. I watched them like I was seeing them for the first time. The way she touched his arm when she made a point, the way he leaned toward her, away from me. They were a unit, and I was an inconvenience. When had I become the outsider in my own marriage? Eleanor was telling a story about his childhood, something about a school play where he'd forgotten his lines but improvised brilliantly. "You were always so clever," she cooed, "so quick on your feet." He was smiling at her with this look of complete adoration. I realized with a sick feeling that I'd never seen him look at me like that. Not in years. Maybe not ever. After dinner, I tried again. We were alone in the bedroom, and I confronted him directly. "I saw the messages," I said. His face went blank for a moment before rearranging itself into concern. "What messages?" "Honey, are you feeling okay? You've been so stressed lately." Gaslighting. That's what it's called when someone makes you doubt your own reality. I knew what I'd seen, but his voice was so steady, so concerned, that for a horrible moment I wondered if I'd imagined it. "The messages between you and your mother about my inheritance," I said, keeping my voice level. "About filing paperwork before I notice." He sighed like I was being unreasonable. "We're just trying to protect the family assets. You know how bad you are with money." "I'm not bad with money. I built a 6-figure career before I gave it up for him. But that's what coercive control does. It rewrites history until you believe the lies." We argued for hours that night. He denied everything, twisted my words, made me feel crazy for being upset. By 3 a.m, I was crying and apologizing for doubting him. He held me and said all the right things, and I fell asleep believing I'd overreacted. That's how good he was. That's how trained I'd become to doubt myself. But morning has a way of bringing clarity. I woke up at dawn with this strange calm settling over me. Something had shifted while I slept. Maybe it was exhaustion breaking through the fog. Maybe it was finally hitting rock bottom. But when I looked at my husband sleeping peacefully next to me, I didn't feel love anymore. I felt nothing. And that's when I knew I had to act. I got up carefully, trying not to wake him. The house was silent, except for the old floorboards creaking under my feet. I made coffee in the kitchen, watching the sun rise through the window over the sink. The same window I'd looked through thousands of mornings, making breakfast for my family, planning my day around everyone else's needs. But this morning felt different. This morning, I was planning for myself. I needed help. Real help, from someone who understood what I was dealing with. I thought about calling my sister, but she lived in Florida, and I hadn't confided in her about any of this. I'd been too ashamed to admit how small I'd become. Then I remembered the family dinner 2 months ago, where I'd met Christina, my brother-in-law's ex-wife. She'd gotten out of a similar situation, divorced the family, and rebuilt her life from scratch. We'd exchanged numbers, but I'd never called. Christina had been married to my husband's younger brother for 23 years. I'd never been close to her during her marriage, mostly because Eleanor had made it clear that Christina was difficult and ungrateful. Looking back, I realized those were code words for a woman who wouldn't be controlled. Christina had left 5 years ago, and the family still talked about her like she was a traitor. I should have paid attention to why they hated her so much. Strong women always threatened Eleanor. I found her contact in my phone and stared at it for 20 minutes before I had the courage to dial. She answered on the second ring, and the warmth in her voice when she recognized mine made me start crying before I could explain anything. "Where are you?" she asked immediately. "Are you safe right now?" Such a simple question, but nobody had asked me that in years. We met at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park the next day. A busy place with loud music and the smell of espresso, where nobody would notice 2 women having an intense conversation in the corner. Christina ordered us both lattes and waited while I stumbled through the whole story. She didn't interrupt. She didn't tell me I was overreacting. She just listened with this expression of recognition that told me she'd lived through her own version of this nightmare. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "You're not crazy," she said firmly. "You're being abused, financially, emotionally, systematically, and I'm going to help you get out." Those words. You're being abused. I'd never let myself think it in those terms. Abuse was physical violence, black eyes and broken bones. This was just a bad marriage, right? But Christina explained coercive control to me, how it's abuse without bruises, how it's just as damaging, sometimes more so because nobody believes you. She told me about her own experience, how her ex-husband and Eleanor had isolated her from her friends, controlled her access to money, made her believe she was incompetent and lucky to be tolerated. Eleanor does this to every woman who marries into that family, Christina said bitterly. She can't stand competition. She needs her sons to choose her over their wives, always. And she's very, very good at making that happen. Christina had lost years to that dynamic. She'd tried marriage counseling, tried talking to other family members, tried everything she could think of to fix things. Nothing worked because the problem wasn't the marriage. The problem was a deliberate campaign to undermine and control her. Finally, she'd gotten smart. She'd documented everything, hired a lawyer, and gotten out. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," she said. "But staying would have killed me. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. I was already dying." She gave me the name of her lawyer, a woman named Patricia, who specialized in cases like mine. "Call her today," Christina urged. "Don't wait. These things escalate." I promised I would. We talked for 3 hours in that coffee shop, and it was like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room I'd been stumbling through in darkness. Christina had been exactly where I was. She understood the guilt, the self-blame, the difficulty of even naming what was happening. Leaving that meeting, I felt different, stronger maybe, or just less alone. I called Patricia from my car before I drove home. She could see me the next day. I hung up and sat in the parking lot, watching people walk by with their normal problems, their normal lives. I envied them, but I also felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Small and fragile, but there. The next morning I told my husband I was going shopping. He barely looked up from his coffee. Eleanor was in the guest house, probably already planning her day's interference. I drove to Patricia's office in the Loop, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel the whole way. Her office was in one of those old buildings with marble floors and brass elevators. Professional, legitimate. This was real. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt like it took forever. I watched the numbers climb and tried to steady my breathing. What was I doing? Was I really going to blow up my entire life based on some text messages and a feeling? But then I remembered Eleanor's voice. Make sure it's done before she notices. I remembered my husband's easy lies. I remembered 37 years of making myself smaller. The elevator doors opened. Patricia was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. She listened to my story with a tape recorder running, taking notes. When I mentioned the text messages, she stopped me. "Do you still have access to his phone?" I nodded. "Good. I need you to document everything. Screenshots, photos, whatever you can get. We're building a case." A case. The word made it real in a way nothing else had. She explained my rights, my options, the likely outcomes. Illinois law, community property, what I was entitled to from my mother's inheritance. Numbers started making sense again in a way they hadn't in years. Patricia had this way of cutting through the emotional fog and getting to the facts. "Your husband and his mother have been committing fraud," she said bluntly. "Financial abuse of a spouse. We can prove it. But you need to be smart about how we proceed." Patricia pulled out a legal pad and started sketching out a strategy. First, we gather evidence. Every document you can find, every conversation you can record legally, every text message, every email. Second, we secure your assets. Make sure they can't move anything else without you knowing. Third, we prepare for confrontation. This won't be pretty, but we can protect you legally and financially. She asked detailed questions about our finances, about Eleanor's involvement, about my husband's business. I answered as best I could, but I realized how much I didn't know about my own money. Patricia noticed my frustration. "This is normal," she said gently. "Financial abusers deliberately keep victims in the dark, but we're going to shine a very bright light on everything they've been hiding." Smart meant pretending everything was fine while I gathered evidence. Smart meant acting like the same compliant wife I'd been while secretly preparing to blow up their entire scheme. Could I do that? Could I lie to their faces every day while building my escape? Patricia must have seen the doubt on my face. "You've been surviving their lies for years," she said gently. "Now you're just surviving strategically." I went home that day and started seeing everything differently. The house wasn't my home anymore. It was a crime scene, and I was collecting evidence. I made copies of every financial document I could find. Bank statements, investment accounts, the deed to the house, life insurance policies. I photographed text messages and emails. I kept a daily journal documenting every conversation, every exclusion, every manipulation. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. I learned to be cunning. When my husband worked late, I went through his home office methodically, photographing documents with my phone and putting everything back exactly as I'd found it. I recorded conversations when Illinois law allowed it, capturing Eleanor's casual cruelty and my husband's dismissiveness. I tracked every time they had a private meeting, every time they excluded me from decisions. The evidence mounted. One night I found a file in my husband's desk labeled Trust Documents. Inside were papers showing he'd created a trust with Eleanor as the primary beneficiary, using money from my mother's inheritance. My mother's money, that she'd left specifically to me, was being funneled into a legal structure I'd never agreed to. I photographed every page, my hands shaking with rage. For 2 months I played my role perfectly. I made Eleanor's favorite meals. I laughed at my husband's jokes. I acted like the devoted wife and daughter-in-law they expected. And the whole time I was building an airtight case against them. There were moments when the rage would hit me so hard I'd have to lock myself in the bathroom and stuff a towel in my mouth to keep from screaming. But I held it together. The acting became easier than I expected. Or maybe it was just that I'd been performing for so long already. Every Sunday dinner felt like theater. I'd set the table with Eleanor's favorite china, the pieces she'd given us as a wedding gift that I'd always hated. Delicate blue flowers on white porcelain, so fragile you were afraid to actually use them. But Eleanor insisted they be used for family meals, and I'd always complied. One particular Sunday stands out. I'd made roast chicken, potatoes, green beans. Eleanor critiqued every dish as usual. The chicken was dry, the potatoes needed more salt, the beans were overcooked. My husband nodded along, agreeing with her assessments. "Maybe you should let Mom cook next week," he suggested with a patronizing smile. I smiled back and said that sounded wonderful. Under the table, my fingernails dug into my palms so hard I drew blood. What they didn't know was that I'd photographed my husband's laptop that morning. I'd found emails to his accountant discussing how to hide assets from me, instructions on creating offshore accounts, plans to transfer the house deed entirely into his name using forged documents. Every word, every scheme, now documented and backed up to a cloud account they didn't know existed. During that dinner, I excused myself to use the bathroom. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at my reflection. My face was calm, smiling even, but my eyes were different, harder. I'd become someone who could smile while planning a war. The woman in the mirror wasn't the one who'd married my husband 37 years ago. She was someone new, someone who would not be broken. Christina became my lifeline during those months. We'd meet for coffee every week, and I'd update her on what I'd found. She'd remind me why I was doing this, help me stay focused when the gaslighting got intense. "They're going to try to make you doubt yourself," she warned. "Every single day. Don't let them. Trust what you know." She taught me tricks for staying grounded. When my husband would tell me I was remembering things wrong, I'd excuse myself and check my journal. When Eleanor would make me feel incompetent, I'd text Christina and she'd remind me of my accomplishments, my career, my worth. She became my anchor to reality when they tried to make me question everything. I remember one especially difficult week in late October. My husband had convinced me to sign what he said were tax documents. I'd almost done it, almost signed without reading. But Christina's voice was in my head. Read everything, question everything, trust nothing they tell you. I insisted on taking the documents to review first. My husband got angry, said I was being difficult and paranoid, but I held firm. Later that night, I photographed those documents. They weren't tax papers. They were transfers of my mother's inheritance into accounts I couldn't access. If I'd signed them, I would have lost everything. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot, shaking, realizing how close I'd come to giving away my future. That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty about what I was doing. They'd tried to steal from me one too many times. The confrontation happened in mid-November. Patricia arranged for us to meet at a notary office under the pretense of signing routine estate documents. My husband thought we were just updating our wills. He brought his mother because of course he did. They couldn't do anything without each other. I showed up with Patricia and a file folder 3 inches thick, the look on their faces when they realized what was happening. I'll remember that forever. We sat down at the conference table, and Patricia laid out every piece of evidence, every fraudulent transfer, every document they'd forged with my signature, every conversation they'd thought was private. My husband went pale. Eleanor started blubbering about family loyalty and how ungrateful I was. Patricia's presentation was methodical and devastating. She had documents spread across the table in chronological order, showing a pattern of financial abuse going back 7 years. She'd found transfers I hadn't even known about, accounts opened in my name without my knowledge, forged signatures on legal documents. The notary sat quietly, witnessing everything, her stamp ready to make this all official. "You're stealing from me," I said quietly. The first words I'd spoken since entering the room. "You've been stealing from me for years, and you made me think I was crazy for noticing." My voice was steady, cold. I barely recognized it as my own. This wasn't the woman who apologized for existing. This was someone new. They tried every tactic, denial, then anger, then tears. Eleanor played the elderly victim, clutching her chest like I was giving her a heart attack. My husband oscillated between fury and wounded betrayal. How could I do this to family? After everything he'd done for me. The gaslighting was automatic, reflexive, but it didn't work anymore. I'd seen behind the curtain. "You made me give up my career," I said, my voice getting stronger. "You isolated me from my friends. You convinced my own children I was losing my mind. You stole my mother's inheritance, the last thing she left me. And you did it all while making me believe I was the problem?" Eleanor tried to interrupt, but Patricia held up her hand. "Mrs. Eleanor," Patricia said formally, "you and your son have committed multiple felonies. Wire fraud, forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. My client is 62 years old, which qualifies her for elder abuse protections under Illinois law. The evidence is overwhelming. You're going to return everything you've stolen, or we're going to the state's attorney." Patricia presented them with 2 options. Sign over everything they'd stolen, retitle all the assets properly, or face criminal charges for fraud and financial elder abuse. Yes, I said elder abuse. At 62, I qualified. The irony wasn't lost on me. Eleanor had been calling me old and useless for years, and now that legal definition was going to protect me. They signed. Every document, every transfer, every correction. It took 3 hours, and by the end my hand was cramping from signing my own name over and over, reclaiming what had always been mine. The notary watched it all with carefully neutral eyes, stamping each page with that satisfying thunk. That sound became my favorite sound in the world. Eleanor tried one last manipulation. "After everything I've done for this family," she said, tears streaming down her face, "I gave you my son. I welcomed you into our lives. This is how you repay me?" I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd spent years systematically destroying my sense of self, who'd turned my own husband against me, who'd stolen from me while smiling to my face. "You didn't give me your son," I said quietly. "You kept him. That was always the problem. And you're right. This is exactly how I repay people who abuse me. I stop letting them." But here's the thing about justice. Real justice, not the movie version. They never faced criminal charges. Patricia advised against it because prosecution would be expensive, lengthy, and uncertain. So they kept their freedom. They kept their reputation in most circles. Eleanor still lives in that guest house because legally I'd have to evict her, and that process would take months I didn't have the energy for. My husband still attends family functions and plays the wounded victim to anyone who'll listen. Does that feel fair? Tell me in the comments because I struggle with it sometimes. They stole from me, manipulated me, tried to erase me from my own life, and they're facing no real consequences beyond having to give back what they took. On bad days, that infuriates me. But most days, I've made peace with it, because their punishment isn't what sets me free. My freedom is what sets me free. I moved out of that Victorian house 3 weeks after the notary meeting, found a small condo in Wicker Park with exposed brick and huge windows that let in so much light I sometimes just sit and watch the sun move across the walls. It's mine. Completely mine. No ghosts, no memories, no mother-in-law in the guest house critiquing my decorating choices. I can breathe here. The day I moved out, I walked through each room one last time. The kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals, the living room where we'd celebrated Christmases, the bedroom where I'd cried myself to sleep more nights than I wanted to count. I thought I'd feel sad, but mostly I felt relieved. This house had been beautiful once, but it had become a cage. Walking out the front door with my last box of belongings felt like parole. I'd hired movers for the furniture, but I packed my personal items myself. I wanted control over what came with me and what stayed behind. In the attic, I found boxes of my old career materials, business cards from clients I'd worked with, photos from property developments I'd helped broker, awards I'd won for sales performance. I'd forgotten all of these existed. Eleanor had suggested I store them in the attic years ago, said they were cluttering the house. Now I understood that was another way of erasing my identity, making my accomplishments invisible. I brought those boxes to my new condo. They sit in my living room now, and I've been going through them slowly, remembering who I was, reconnecting with that version of myself. I found a photo from a real estate conference in 1995. I'm standing with a group of colleagues, smiling confidently, holding a plaque for top sales in the region. I look powerful, capable, happy. I've framed that photo and put it on my desk. A reminder, the movers were professional and efficient. They didn't ask questions about why a woman my age was leaving such a beautiful house for a small condo. But I caught one of them, a young woman, probably in her 20s, giving me this look of understanding. As she carried out my last box, she said quietly, "Good for you." Just those 3 words, but they meant everything. Even a stranger could see I was escaping something. My new place is smaller, just a 1-bedroom, but it's perfect. I painted the walls myself, colors I chose without asking anyone's opinion. Soft blues and warm creams that make me feel calm. I bought furniture I actually liked instead of what was practical or traditional. There's a reading nook by the window where I spend Sunday mornings with coffee and books. Nobody interrupts me. Nobody needs anything from me. It's gloriously, beautifully quiet. The divorce is ongoing. Illinois requires a 6-month separation period, so I won't be legally free until spring. But emotionally? I divorced them both the moment I walked out. I blocked my husband's number. I blocked Eleanor's. I blocked anyone who wanted to play mediator or convince me I was overreacting. Clean break. Scorched earth. The only way to survive this was to burn everything down and start over. Christina has become my closest friend. We meet every Sunday for brunch, and she's introducing me to her circle of friends. Strong women who've been through their own battles and came out the other side. Last week, one of them invited me to join her book club. Such a small thing, but it made me cry. I haven't had friends in so long. Eleanor systematically drove away anyone who might have given me perspective or support. I'm building something new. Christina calls it my chosen family, and I love that phrase. Family isn't just who you're born to or who you marry. It's who shows up, who sees you, who holds space for your mess without trying to fix you. These women, most of whom I've known less than 3 months, have given me more genuine care than my husband and his family did in 37 years. One of my new friends, Maria, is a therapist who specializes in trauma recovery. She's been helping me process everything, helping me understand that what happened to me wasn't my fault, that I wasn't weak or stupid or deserving of abuse. That coercive control is a deliberate tactic designed to break down even strong people. Some days, I believe her. Some days, I still struggle with shame. But I'm getting better. I started taking a ceramics class at the community center. My hands are always covered in clay now, and I love it. I'm terrible at throwing pots, but that's not the point. The point is making something with my own hands. Creating instead of maintaining. Expressing instead of suppressing. Last week, I made this lumpy bowl that looks like it was shaped by a drunk toddler, and I've never been prouder of anything. There's something meditative about working with clay. You have to be fully present, focused on the feel of the material under your fingers, the pressure you're applying, the shape emerging. You can't think about the past or worry about the future. You're just there, in that moment, creating. It's therapy in a way talk therapy can't quite reach. My teacher says I'm getting better, but honestly, I don't care. Perfect bowls aren't the point. Money-wise, I'm stable. Better than stable, actually. Getting back my mother's inheritance, plus what was rightfully mine from the marriage, means I'm more financially secure now than I've been in decades. I hired a financial advisor, a woman Patricia recommended, and we meet monthly to review my accounts. I'm learning about investments and retirement planning and all the things my husband told me I was too stupid to understand. Turns out I'm pretty good at this. Sometimes I run into people who knew us as a couple. The questions are always awkward. "How's your husband?" they ask, and I have to decide how much to explain. Usually I just say we separated and let them draw their own conclusions. A few people have reached out to say they noticed something was wrong. They could see I wasn't happy. I appreciate the sentiment, but where were they when I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy? Night is still hard. I wake up sometimes, disoriented in my new space, and for a terrible moment, I think I'm still in that old house. Then I remember where I am and why, and relief washes over me. But there's grief, too. 37 years. That's a lot of life to walk away from, even when that life was suffocating you. I mourn the woman I used to be before all this. The confident real estate broker who thought she could do anything. I'm not her anymore, and I never will be again. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the point isn't to go back to who I was. Maybe the point is to become someone new, someone who knows what coercive control looks like and will never tolerate it again, someone who understands that sacrifice shouldn't mean self-erasure, someone who knows her worth isn't measured by how small she can make herself. I've started thinking about going back to work, not real estate. That ship sailed years ago, and the industry has changed too much. But maybe something in property management or consulting. I miss using my brain professionally. I miss solving problems that aren't emotional minefields. Christina thinks I should start my own business, something small that I can build on my own terms. The idea terrifies and excites me in equal measure. Last week I met with a career counselor, something I never would have done before. She assessed my skills, my experience, my passions. "You're more qualified than you think," she said, showing me a list of possibilities. Real estate consulting, property evaluation, even teaching courses on commercial real estate fundamentals. I have 3 decades of knowledge that's still valuable, still relevant. I'd convinced myself I was obsolete, but that was their voice in my head, not reality. I've been updating my resume, a document I haven't touched in over 20 years. It's surreal seeing my career laid out on paper. All those deals I closed, all those properties I evaluated, all those clients I served. That was me. I did that. Before I became someone who apologized for existing, I was someone who made things happen. And maybe, just maybe, I could be that person again. My son called last week. We hadn't spoken much since the separation. I think Eleanor and my husband had been feeding him their version of events. But he talked to his sister, and she'd told him some of what really happened. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have protected you." I wanted to be angry with him for not noticing sooner, for not questioning the narrative his father and grandmother had built. But I couldn't. They'd manipulated him too, just in different ways. "You were their son and grandson," I told him. "You trusted them. That's not your fault." We talked for 2 hours, really talked, for the first time in years. He wants to visit soon, to see my new place, to rebuild our relationship. It won't erase the years of exclusion, but it's a start. My daughter has been more supportive from the beginning. She'd always had a complicated relationship with Eleanor, had seen her manipulative tendencies more clearly. "I tried to tell Dad," she confessed during one of our calls. "Years ago. But he wouldn't listen. He'd always choose Grandma." We cried together over that, over the years lost to Eleanor's control, over the family that could have been if my husband had chosen differently. Before I close this story, I need to share something important I learned through all of this. Something that might help you or someone you love who's trapped in a similar situation. Because the question everyone asks is, why do victims stay? Why didn't I leave sooner? What was I thinking? Here's the truth about why victims stay in coercive control situations. It's not weakness. It's not stupidity. It's a complex psychological trap built over time, and understanding it is crucial. First, there's isolation. My husband and Eleanor systematically cut me off from support systems. Friends who asked too many questions were labeled as toxic. Family members who might have helped were painted as interfering. They created a bubble where their version of reality was the only version I heard. Second, there's gradual erosion of self-worth. They didn't start by calling me worthless. They started with small suggestions that I wasn't quite good enough. Over years, those suggestions became my internal voice. I believed I was bad with money because they told me so often. I believed I was oversensitive because they said it every time I got upset. Your self-image becomes shaped by your abuser's words. Third, there's financial dependence. When I gave up my career, I gave up my financial independence. That wasn't an accident. Abusers create economic vulnerability deliberately. It's harder to leave when you don't know if you can support yourself. Even with my mother's inheritance, my husband had convinced me I'd lose everything in a divorce, that I'd end up poor and alone. Fear of poverty keeps many people trapped. Fourth, there's trauma bonding. Not every day was terrible. There were good moments, times when my husband was kind and loving. That intermittent reinforcement is powerful. You keep hoping if you just try harder, those good moments will become permanent. You stay for the person you remember, not the person they've become. Fifth, there's shame. I didn't tell anyone what was happening because I was embarrassed. At 62, with decades of life experience, how could I let myself be manipulated like this? Society tells us that smart, strong people don't get abused, so we hide it rather than admit we're not as strong as we thought. That silence protects the abuser and isolates the victim further. Sixth, there's the sunk cost fallacy. 37 years of marriage, a lifetime of history. Walking away feels like admitting all that time was wasted. There's enormous psychological pressure to make it work, to justify the investment you've already made. Nobody wants to believe they spent their life with someone who didn't truly love them. And finally, there's the simple exhaustion of coercive control. When you're constantly walking on eggshells, constantly being told you're wrong, constantly fighting to maintain your grip on reality, you don't have energy left to plan an escape. It's like being in quicksand. The more you struggle, the more tired you get, until staying still feels like the only option. If you're reading this and recognizing yourself, please hear me. It's not your fault. The manipulation is designed to make you doubt yourself. The isolation is designed to trap you. The financial control is designed to keep you dependent. But you can break free. It starts with one phone call, one honest conversation, one small act of defiance. Find your Christina, find your Patricia, find anyone who will believe you and help you build a path out. And if you're reading this and you know someone who might be in this situation, please don't judge them for staying. Don't ask why they don't just leave as if it's simple. Offer support without conditions. Believe them when they share what's happening. Be the person who breaks through the isolation their abuser has built. You might save a life. Thank you for staying with me through this whole story. I know it was long and painful in parts. I hope it helped you understand something, either about yourself or someone you care about. If it did, leave me a like. It really helps and lets me know these stories matter. I want to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Drop a comment with your city and time zone. It amazes me that people all over the world hear these stories and connect with them. We're all dealing with versions of the same struggles, just in different places. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed and fought for the marriage? Would you have left sooner? Do you think I should have pushed for criminal charges even though it would have been expensive and uncertain? I genuinely want to know your thoughts. The comments section is where we learn from each other. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I share stories like this regularly, and you might find yourself in one of them. Or you might find the courage to change your own story. Either